So a little bit more about feeding your fry. One of the most common things that happens is overfeeding. And when you overfeed, you end up getting a lot of uneaten food in the tank, which affects the quality of the water. You want to have nice, clean water in there. So what I've got here are some size amounts that you feed the salmon. Your teacher received 3 bags. This is the number 1 food, the number 2 food, and the number 3 food. And these little pinches I've put on here, along with a thumbtack, show you really how little you have to feed. So when you first start feeding your salmon, you're going to feed them once an hour all throughout the school day. Just a tiny little pinch of the number 1 food. So several times a day. Then, after about a week, you're going to introduce just a little bit of the number 2 food to the number 1 food. And then you'll feed them that for another week. And then you'll switch to the number 2 food. And then after a week of feeding the number 2 food, you'll take some of the number 3 food and mix it with the number 2. Feed that for a few days. Watch your salmon while you're feeding them as well, because you'll be able to tell if you're feeding too much, if you get a lot of food that settles on the bottom. And eventually, before you release your salmon, you'll be feeding them strictly the number 3 food. So again, be careful not to overfeed. So these are some aquatic invertebrates that I captured this morning. And within about 5 minutes, I had all of these. And this is just a small part of what exists in Williams Lake. So this environment is full of all kinds of food for salmon fry and other small fish, and even other aquatic invertebrates. Even certain kinds of ducks will eat these as well. So there's a lot in there. The more you look, the more you see. It's kind of like, where's Waldo? Can you find Waldo in there? So these are mayflies, and there are a lot of mayflies in Williams Lake, and they provide food for so many other animals, and not just for fish, but for also aquatic insects. And there are more than 700 different kinds of mayflies throughout North America. And they are fascinating to watch when you look at them under a low-power microscope. Their gills are along the sides of their bodies. And the mayflies are quite fascinating to watch as they're breathing with their gills. Okay, here comes one. Oh, that's a freshwater shrimp that went in there with those mayflies. And here's another mayfly. Yeah. So this is from a water sample that I took out of the lake just this morning before we started filming. And it took me about 5 minutes to get all kinds of different aquatic invertebrates. So that's a new word for you, aquatic invertebrates. So aquatic meaning they found in the water, and invertebrates that they have no backbone. There's a nice mayfly. And most of the time we simply call them water bugs. But you will sound really smart in the future when you call these aquatic invertebrates. So what we have in here are freshwater shrimps. They're also called scuds or side swimmers. So these are cousins of crabs and lobsters. And they're also very abundant in Williams Lake. There are lots and lots of them. And they get a lot bigger than this as well. And if you know somebody who's a fly fisherman love to make artificial flies that copy the mayflies as well as these scuds that you're looking at here right now. And so they'll all be going to live in the freshwater pond tank here at Scout Island when we're done looking at them. Okay, so we've got a couple of different aquatic invertebrates here. These ones, if you look carefully, it looks like they have little paddles. And they're a type of beetle called a water boatman. And water boatmen show up in big numbers sometimes during the year, depending on the time of year that it is. And as a type of beetle, they can actually fly. So we have to watch them when we put them in our tanks here. These other two wonderful creatures are larvae of an insect called a damselfly. And you might have seen a damselfly and mistaken it for a dragonfly. They look like dragonflies, but they're smaller and they have a skinny abdomen, and many of them have a bright blue color. You can see them swimming around, or flying around rather, in the marshes. So this is what they look like when they are larvae. And the damselflies are actually quite the predators. They'll eat mosquito larvae, they'll eat the mayfly larvae, and when they are ready to come out of the water and turn into flying adults, they'll climb up onto a piece of vegetation. Also, if you look at the back end over here, I'll get you to turn around a little bit. So these things on the back end of the damselfly larva are its gills. So they actually breathe through their bum. So these two here are larger than the other invertebrates that we were looking at. This one here is a dragonfly larva. You've all seen dragonflies before. This one over here is called a scorpion bug, and it's got very long legs, and it actually has a very long tube that it uses to breathe through. So it hangs from the top of the water and sticks the end of the tube out in order to breathe. Both of them are predators, and they will eat everything else that we've looked at so far. In fact, the dragonfly larvae are so good at hunting, they will even eat the baby salmon if they can catch them. So dragonfly larva and a scorpion bug.